Hi everybody, welcome back to part 7 of the Border 132 scale Lancaster build. And we're starting off obviously this week with the inboard wing panels. So I'll get these parts cut off, cleaned up and getting them ready for assembly. In this video we'll be building these panels, but they also include the inboard nacelles and the undercarriage base, so we'll be tackling those as well. Just do a test fit. As always on this kit, it's a good idea to check the parts. So I'll just build the starboard side on camera. Obviously it's more or less duplicated on the port side. The starboard side carries the dinghy hatch here, and Wingnut Wings have got that right. I say Wingnut Wings because Wingnut Wings were the original designer and mould maker for this kit before they went out of production, and they managed to get this detail right, unlike HK in their 32 scale kit where you had to rescribe or scribe this from scratch on that kit. This kit includes the detail of the dinghy, or its cover I suppose, underneath the panel, so that's a really nice detail, and it's a hallmark of this kit. All those little details are provided straight out of the box. You don't have to scratch build very much on this kit. I've done very little scratch building on this kit, and that's covered by a transparency later on in the build. The undercarriage legs are absolutely huge on a 132 scale Lancaster, and these are really nicely detailed. I think the brake lines are included. I don't think we're going to have to do anything extra to them. These inner undercarriage bulkheads are really nice. They've got the sides of the fuel tank you can see through the lattice there. Never seen that before on a Lancaster kit, I don't think. Now, sometimes these were covered up, they had a thin skin over them sometimes, but I'm going to leave them as they are. I think that's a nice detail. As you can see, the undercarriage bay door here is moulded integrally with the nacelle side, which I don't mind. It's how the model's going to be finished on its legs. I don't think there's the option straight out of the box to have the doors closed. There isn't a separate set of doors, I don't think, so I imagine you'd have to slice these off and do a bit of surgery to get them in the closed position if that's what you wanted to do. You do occasionally see some of these models built in a flying pose, so that's what those builders must have had to do. So as I say, I can't see any option for that in the kit. That's a bit strange because the kit does offer weighted and unweighted wheels, tyres at least. I'm going to be using the weighted ones obviously. Just remembering to be very careful with these fine rod shaped parts, because early on in the build when I was doing the cockpit I did manage to break some of these parts. Plastic's fairly fragile. There are other bits of fine detail to go in this assembly, but I'm going to leave them on the sprue for the moment to avoid losing them. Next step is just to do a test fit of these parts before I get them into some primer. Just pop the wheel halves together they can be set aside to dry thoroughly before I clean the seam up. There are aftermarket wheels available for this model, but these aren't bad. They do have the ribs on the sidewalls, but they don't include the manufacturer's logos on them. So it's a refinement you might want to add if you're building the model. This behind is the oil tank, and I'm going to have to check up on my Lancaster colours before I go much further with this assembly, because these are going to be different colours and they're going to need painting before assembly. So I'm going to need to do that bit of research, because I've forgotten what I did with my previous Lancaster build. Now we're going to have a couple of ejector pins to fill. There's one right in the middle of the undercarriage bay roof there, so I'll tackle that one. The other ones aren't going to be very obvious, so I'll probably leave those, but certainly this one in the middle needs sorting out. There are also some very shallow ones on the back of these ribs, which I'll deal with as well. Just give them a light sanding. They're shallow enough to come out with a sanding stick. More test fitting. So the nacelle interior, or the undercarriage bay bulkheads, are a good fit, so I'll just check the position of the legs next. There's lots of seam lines, sprue gates to clean up on these legs, and it's worth doing, because if you leave them, they become really obvious when you get the primer on. And on these rod shapes, seam lines really do spoil them, so it's worth just spending this time just to clean them up properly. Makes a big difference on the finished model, I think. There's a bit more detail I suppose you could add to these undercarriage units, but I think you'd really have to think about whether or not it's going to be worth it on the finished model, because I don't think there'll be many times that you'll turn a 132 scale Lancaster over to inspect the undercarriage bays, and that for me would be a consideration, so I'm not going to go overboard with this. Once you've got the thing built, you're going to leave this standing where it is on display. I've just broken off this little rod, just caught it with my hand and it snapped straight in two. But I'm not too bothered about that, it's an easy part to replace. I'll do that with some styrene rod later on. I'll just mark the position before I sand the stub of that broken part off. So just take care with these parts. As you can see, they're easy to break. Okay, so that test fit is quite interesting, because it's actually quite difficult to get the parts to line up simultaneously. So I'm just going to have to think a little bit about construction. The way in the instruction I don't think is the best way of going about things. And what I want to do is make sure that the back of the struts are located properly and firmly on the back bulkhead. And it's very difficult to do that when you've built up the undercarriage base, so I'm going to have to think of a better way around that. But what this shows is that the parts do fit together eventually. It's just working out the best order to go about things. So as I said, I'll give that some thought. This is the interior of the flap bay. In this kit the part's a little bit warped at the back here, so I'm going to be gluing it down in steps, making sure that I bring the warp out. This is the flap, and we just need to fit the ribs inside of this. You can see here I've broken off one of these little rods. I just caught it with the tip of my finger on the, well, it was on the sprue, and it just snapped off. Just shows you how fragile these parts are. You've got to be so careful with them. I've mentioned before about the border instructions not being the best, and this is a case in point where the actuator rods here, this part, it's not obvious on the drawing how it goes together, not at first glance anyway, but it's pretty obvious when you bring the parts together that you've got them in the right place. So you just have to trust the engineering of the original design that Wingnut Wings did. It's a very accurate fit. It's a shame that the border models bits, the instructions, colour call-outs, things like that, just let the kit down a little bit. So when you've got a broken part like this, which is just a rod, it's sometimes easier just to replace the whole thing rather than try to join the broken parts together. So I'll just take that off down at the bottom. Okay, I think that's just about as far as I can go with the preparation of these undercarriage parts. I've sanded the filler on that ejector pin in the middle of the undercarriage bay roof, so hopefully that'll come out alright. And I'm going to be using some of this. This is Mr. Finishing Surfacer 1500 Black. It's a great base for the undercarriage bays, which are going to be black anyway, but it's a good base, and I'll be covering it with some NATO black just to break the finish up a little bit. So I'll get these parts over to the spray booth, get them all primed, and we'll come back, see what we've got to do after that. So here we've started the painting of these parts. I've just, after the Mr. Surfacer 1500 black primer, just started to add some colour to these. The red on the tanks, that's a Tamiya lacquer colour called, I think it's dark red. And the other parts, I've overcoated them with some NATO black from Tamiya as well. It's just a slightly off black, it's not quite as stark as pure black. The undercarriage legs are quite a complicated thing to mask off, really, and when you're doing these, you've got to just consult your references, find some reference photographs of the aircraft that you're building, because the finish on the undercarriage legs on Lancasters varied quite a lot from one airframe to another, and you can't really generalise about the finish on the legs in terms of the demarcation between aluminium parts or metal coloured parts and the black. So I've got lots of good references for this particular aircraft, so I'm just following those. Even so, you can look at one photograph from one time period and then another time period, and the colours have changed. So there's still variation that you've got to cope with, but I'll be happy enough when they're done. I'm just going to get these over and paint them in some Tamiya matte aluminium, and after that we can add a little bit of weathering wash to them just to pick out some of the detail. With the black areas, I just want to bring the detail out with a very fine dry brush in probably something like a German grey, just to highlight them, and I'll pick out one or two other details with the brush as well. That's not bad, we've just got one or two touch-ups to do. It's got some bit of overspray, but that's not a problem, soon sort that out. Just tidy up these legs a bit now with a paintbrush. Just get into the detail that I couldn't get with the masking tape. There's quite a lot of work to do with these undercarriage parts, but it's worthwhile, I suppose, because the kit provides the detail. You might as well bring it out with careful painting, and I prefer in the main to airbrush my colours, which means that I have to do quite a bit of masking up. But it's just how I like the finish. So I'm taking a different route for putting the undercarriage together from what Border tell us. And that's because it's very difficult to get particularly this back location for the legs in the proper place and to get it fixed securely. So I'm going to do that before I get these side bulkheads in. It's possible to get these in afterwards with a bit of wiggling around, but leaving those off at this stage just means that you can get a really solid join of the undercarriage legs themselves, which is really important. The other thing that I'm doing is when I'm putting the undercarriage legs in, I'm pinning them with some nickel silver rod. So here we've just got some pins in the back driven through, and that just helps to lock the undercarriage together. Done it at the front here, but going in sideways through the mounting plate and into the undercarriage leg. So there's 4 really strong pins. Nickel silver is a very stiff metal, and they really support the undercarriage legs and really stiffen them up a lot. So just get the leg in its correct position on the rear bulkhead, and I'm just going to drill through first of all. And we'll just push the pin through. Now obviously this is nowhere in the instructions, and you might find that you can get the legs together and get them nice and strong, but I think it just adds that little bit of extra security to the undercarriage. Now when we come to fit these permanently, I'll glue these in with some CA, the pins, and just trim the ends off. Obviously that's completely contrary to the border instructions, but I've test fitted the sequence and it does work. This is just a bit of Tamiya panel liner. This is the dark brown, which works well on the sort of aluminium areas. Kind of gives a effect of grease on the linkages and things like that, rather than just the stark aluminium. So a simple application of this wash just transforms these parts, really brings all that detail out. They can look a little bit flat before you do this, so it's a stage well worth tackling, I think. So I'll just let that wash dry for half an hour or so, then I'll just wipe off a little bit of excess that I've got in 1 or 2 areas, just with some mineral spirits, white spirit, and then we can start to do some assembly. Just while I'm waiting for that wash to dry, I'll just do a little bit more on these 2 tanks. These are the oil tanks, and they do have 2 mounting straps on them, which, rather than mask off and paint, which is a bit fiddly, I'm just going to use some of this, which is decal strip, black decal strip from Extra Decal. Comes in various sizes, as you can see. There's one there that we're going to be able to use. So just a quick shortcut. This is some German grey that I've got to dry brush the parts. It'll just pop the detail out again. So German grey over black is a nice combination. The German grey is just enough just to pick up on the corners of the detail and lift it a little bit. So I think we're ready for a bit of assembly now. The assembly is handed, so everything's designed with keys in them so that the flats will stay level on the ground when you assemble the legs, which is quite clever engineering. The tricky thing with this part of the assembly is getting the oil tank in between the legs and simultaneously getting the cross brace in as well. So once everything's located, you can glue the tank into place. That would actually hold the whole assembly together. You can also glue the tops of the cross brace as well if you want, but that's not essential really. The whole thing will hold together without that. I'm just marking up the port and starboard on these because the assemblies are different. And I don't want to get them mixed up. Those are the completed legs, and quite a complex assembly really. The original kit designer Wingnut Wings did a good job of those. I'm going to carry on by fitting them in this unconventional way really onto the inner undercarriage frame now. Now this is nothing like the way that the border instructions tell us to build the undercarriage, but I think it will be stronger in the long run. So the pins here are securing these undercarriage legs at the back, the mountings at the back here, nice and strong. It'd be really difficult to get that sort of strength building it the way that BIII tell us to do. Okay, so with the undercarriage units built up and installed into the bulkheads, you can now get these fitted into the top of the wing. And this is a very precise fit. It sometimes feels as though it's not going to go, but it will do. So if you're struggling with any part of the assembly on this model, you know that you've got something wrong somewhere. So when you hear that telltale click, you know that you're in the right place. That's located properly. The tab on the top of the oil tank is a really positive location, so that adds again a lot of security to this whole assembly. So that's the starboard side. I'll just let that dry for a while whilst I do the port. So you can see with a little bit of manoeuvring you can get this bulkhead in. So with it in place, I'll just give it a bit of glue just to secure it. Let's get the lower wing panel fitted now. Now I've tried to do this with the flap fitted and it didn't work. There was too much to come together all at the same time, so we'll pop the flap on later. And we've got this little mould in here, this part which just ensures that the two wing halves are aligned properly. And that's quite a tight fit. So we do need to do a little bit of manoeuvring around now. Okay, so I'm going to leave those to dry now. It's gone together well. And there's just the sides of the nacelles to fit, the engine bay bulkhead, and I think there's a couple of retraction jacks as well for the undercarriage doors, so we'll tackle those once this is dry. Okay, the wing's dried enough now to get the sides of the nacelles on. Just check fit them, it's going to go in alright. I know I keep saying it, but test fitting is absolutely vital on this kit. If you don't do it, it's bound to catch you out at some point. So next, these are the engine bulkheads or firewalls. And just one tip if you're building this model, and I suppose any model really, is just to make sure that you're not going to be able to see through and see any bare plastic. So this is a good case in point where if you look through the back of the undercarriage bay, you can just spot the firewall at the front. And you don't want to be seeing grey plastic through there, so just a quick squirt of some flat black does the job. This is the last of the panels we're going to be using in this step. Good, well they're all done. I'm not going to fit the flaps just yet. They can go on a bit later on because I'm going to have them in the open position, so they're just going to get in the way a little bit. So I'll leave those off till later. But that's taken quite a bit longer than I expected. It's quite a complicated thing to put together. And altering the sequence, I think, helps a little bit in terms of getting everything lined up and getting the undercarriage nice and strong in there. As I said, it needs to support a big model when this is done. So I'll leave it there and get some photographs of these, try and get some close-ups of them, although it's difficult with them being a black interior really. But I'll do my best for you and get those posted at the end of the video. So I'm going to be starting a new project in the next few days, which I'll bring you up to date with later on. And I'm going to be obviously carrying on with the Lancaster. Not sure what I'm going to be moving on to next. Probably taking a look at getting the engines done on the inboard side on the front of these nacelles. So that'll be coming up fairly soon, and hopefully you'll join me for that one. So enjoy your modelling, everybody. See you soon. Bye for now.